Okay, let's jump right in. So, what will I be talking about today? Um, Happy to have you all here. Obviously, a lot of you will have some kind of experience with chatbots or conversational AI, as we call it now. Um, and what we're talking about is like when and how to use chatbots. So, I'm not really going to list like all the use cases a person could imagine, but what I am going to tell you is like some customer success stories. So what kind of customers have we worked with, and some ideas of different kinds of chatbots that exist out there in the world. And then like how do you determine whether you will use a chatbot, and what does it kind of take? And obviously addressing the elephant in the room, what about large language models, or in other words, chat GPT or generative AI, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to talk about that a bit. And then I'm going to give you hopefully some key insights. And by that time, you'll probably have some questions. If you disagree with me on anything, feel free to jump in and tell me where I'm wrong. You know, it's a day not learned is a day lost. So I'd like to start off with a little introduction of myself. I asked Bard, Google's Bard, talking about generative AI, to tell you all something about myself. So according to Bard, I'm a writer, screenwriter, and consultant in conversational AI, which is part of that. Well, most of it is true. I'm creative director of CDI Services, which is the delivery branch of CDI. And I also authored a book called Conversational AI, The Human-Centered Approach. It tells you a bit about some movies that I wrote, and that I joined CDI Services in 2017. And then I'm a regular contributor to The Guardian, New York Times, and Wired. And once again, that book is mentioned. This is really interesting because it's generative AI. A part of it's true. A lot of it's complete nonsense. So I never wrote a book. I've written columns for a Dutch newspaper, but never contributed to The Guardian, the New York Times, or Wired. Would be nice though. So that's just something I'll be returning to when we get into the LLM discussion. Um, let's see. Yeah. So as I said, I work for Services, which is the delivery branch of CDI. We work with clients, and we work across all kinds of business areas, be it education, healthcare, telco, insurance, government. We use all kinds of platforms. We're platform agnostic, as we like to say, so we work in any platform that our customers choose. We also consult sometimes with customers to help them pick a suitable platform. This is our bragging slide. We work with all these awesome brands. I'm very proud of that. And a lot of nice brands that we work with are missing or just too new to be joined to this slide. So great stuff. So I just wanted to give you some insights today based on these experiences, right? So let's just answer the question right away. So when do you use a chatbot? So basically, you can use chatbots to automate nearly all kinds of conversations you may have with customers, citizens, clients, employees, students, patients, anyone you have conversations with. You can automate them. So the important thing to hear on this slide is like it's about automating conversations. So a conversation is a back and forth. So it's somebody asking for help who needs to be guided through steps and stuff like that. So a conversation is something that is mutual and goes back and forth. A lot of stuff in the academy about that, you know, what is a conversation, psychology of conversations, Paul Grice and stuff like that. So basically, as long as there's a conversation between you and another party, you can use a chatbot to automate all or part of that. But it only makes sense if you can do it really well. So what does that look like? We have some customer success stories here. This is from way back when we were called Robocopy. We worked for a Dutch media company called School TV, which is a public broadcasting owned company. And we created a voice experience on a website where they could talk to Willem of Orange, who is the founding father of our nation. So really fun, educational voice experience, totally uncommercial. So, you know, it's for a public broadcasting company. So obviously there was a budget, but there weren't any like commercial gains to be had there, as opposed to being able to talk to your coffee maker, which is something that is in process right now. This soon you'll be able to tell your coffee maker to brew me a cup of coffee. Smart home solutions obviously are very like all the raids about 2 years ago haven't really taken the leap, I think, that people expected them to. I mean, there's only so many people who really want to talk to their fridge, I guess. But it was a really interesting and fun project to do. Then, completely different, working for the world's largest healthcare company, developing an internal chatbot, first of all, an HR chatbot, later on, an general internal chatbot, just a one spot to go to for all their employees across many languages and areas and countries, to a one-stop solution for them to solve all these internal business related issues. So how do I request time off? What about my 501k? All that good stuff. Really interesting challenge. A lot of content, a lot of different varieties of the questions. So really interesting project. Going global, Vodafone, obviously everybody knows Vodafone. They have a really successful chatbot, customer-facing chatbot called Toby. It has 1 million conversations on a daily basis. We help them create a global persona and an experience toolkit so that local markets could develop their own Toby chatbots, but within the safety and the brand identity with a global persona and design guidelines, so that consistent quality was ensured all around the world, even though local markets could implement their own versions. One of the key insights over the last 3 years, especially, is that whereas before 3 years ago, chatbots were, maybe a hobby, basically, for a lot of companies. So they were part of the innovation track. They didn't need to really deliver anything specific, as long as a team could show that, we're on the chatbot bandwagon. We've built one too, a great success, but it doesn't really make for a successful application of a chatbot, and it doesn't make for a successful discovery phase of whether a chatbot is useful for you. So the business case, making a business case for your chatbot, is basically to answer a question either upfront or during a project. Is it worth doing, or is it still worth doing? So pre-funding, pre-project, so when you're still deciding whether to do it, a high-level business case can show you whether the investment will live up to the potential returns. Now, you're going to have to make a lot of assumptions, but you're also going to want to be as data-driven as you can. Once you're in the project, creating a more detailed business case, can inform where you spend your money, where you spend your hours and time and attention. You will have more data to work with, so you'll be able to be much more accurate. And you can also use it to monitor how you're doing towards KPIs and stuff, and whether you're still moving along a ascending path. So this great slide, it's about, my colleague Willem, I think, made a joke. It's about Copernicus discovering that the business case is the sun that all the planets revolve around. Business case really ties in to everything. It determines what your roadmap is going to be. So how long, for example, will you need to get returns? How long are you willing to invest before you get returns? What's your strategy going to be? How are you going to measure success? What are your KPIs? What does your team look like? What technology should you be using? And the overall vision behind what you want to achieve. So really important to think out, even if it's just, when you're starting off, even if it's just on the back of a piece of paper, just have these 4 or 5 elements defined. So what do you need? Preferably as much data as possible. So interaction volume. So how many times are your customers talking to your business? How many customers are there? How long are they talking to your business? How much is that costing your business, for example? Also understanding, where are you right now? Technological speaking, do you have a team? And be realistic. How will conversational AI improve that current state? Maybe it won't. It's never worth building a chatbot just for building a chatbot, right? If you want to do that, just do it on the weekend and make a crazy one and have fun with it, right? But if you're talking about business, make sure that it can actually improve your business, your retail, or whatever somehow. Really important is understand where your team's strengths and weaknesses lie. So what kind of people do you have? What will they be able to do? What are they willing to do? Is it their core job, or is it just something they're doing on the side, which will really have impact on long term? And know your technical capabilities. Can you actually find any data? Do you have people who can create API integrations, all that kind of stuff, right? So in short, it's all about finding the sweet spot between desirability, viability, and feasibility. So desirability is finding out, preferably through user research and asking really hard questions of yourself also, is like, will people want this service, this chatbot service that you're offering? Will they use it? Do they need it? It's like we've seen it a lot in the app building industry. Like just a few years ago, every company in the world was building an app, but people with smartphones only have limited real estate on their smartphone. Will they actually ever download and use your app? So viability is all about money, right? What cost savings can you realize that justify an investment? Or can you create revenue? So can you really sell stuff through your chatbot? And then feasibility, like, can you do it? So do you have the technological know-how? Do you have a team? Do you have people who are trained by CDI who can create a chatbot, for example? So if you have these three things, then the light goes to green and you can start building a chatbot, or you can optimize your project. So really important there is, like, if you believe it's feasible, if you think you found the sweet spot, how do you decide what goes in the chat? So that's what we call business scoping. So a key insight to remember here is, like, a chatbot will deliver value if it's based on what your customers really ask and how they ask those questions. Now, how they ask those questions is basically a technological constraint. So if you don't know how your customers ask questions, you're going to have a really, really hard time training your chatbot to be able to understand what they mean, right? So it's really important that you know how they ask questions. You can find that through live chat data, or WhatsApp conversations with customers, or even like kind of scanning emails that they send you and trying to figure out how they talk. This can really, it can also really, really be surprising how they talk to chatbots. We've had customers whose or our clients whose customers talk to them in a certain way on the phone, and then in the chatbot just start putting in entire essays and stuff. It can be really surprising. So there's no real hard data on how to do that. But once you know these things, and especially what your customers ask your business, like we see so many instances where clients will show us an FAQ page, and you can see immediately that half of those FAQs are what the client wants to tell customers, but aren't actually things that customers ever ask. So be really honest about what your customers are asking your business. So knowing that, we're going to try to see which use cases are in scope and to what extent we want to cover those use cases, right? So ideally, you want to cover use cases that deliver value, either to your company or to your customers, preferably to both. So this should inform your backlog. So you're going to look at all the data, find out what people are asking, and then that should be on the backlog as potential candidates for your use cases, right? So then once you know that customers are asking, the value irritant matrix is really useful kind of mind tool to kind of figure out what kind of stuff are you going to automate. So if it's high value to the customer, but it's relatively low value to us, that's a really high candidate to automate, so to put in the chatbot. If it's high value to both, it's like definitely something if we can, we want to automate it, and we also want to encourage it, right? So this is, for example, all sales journeys are in here. Here, if it's low value to the customer and low value to the company, eliminate. And eliminate can also be having a really good little flow in your chatbot just to get it sorted, like change of address, for example. And if it's high value to us and low value to the customer, same. Change of address is probably that. It's important for us as a business to know where our customers are. For example, if you're a bank, you need to have that information. You want to make it really easy for the customer to do that because it has no real value to them, right? So low value to the company, high value for people, just add basic coverage, right? So we're user first. Some if it's high value for your customers, you want to address it, but you don't want to invest too much in it. So, for example, what we see a lot is that you lead people to a certain part of the website or a online environment that helps them self-serve. An example, the chatbot says, "How can I help you?" And then the customer, it's a banking chatbot, and the customer says, "I'd like to customize my credit card," which is it's awesome. It's a service that we offer as a bank, but it doesn't really have any value for us, but it can be very valuable for customers because they enjoy that stuff. So then the chatbot says, "Great, you deserve a credit card that suits your style," and then gives you a link where you can get started right away. It's not really worth having a full transactional journey in the chatbot because that takes a lot of upkeep and design time and all that effort. But it is good to address it and answer it. So if it's high value to both, it's really important to realize that this is like the priority content. If you put nothing else in your chatbot, then put your high value to both journeys in there. Always address these questions to the best of your ability. So use the limit of your capability of your team in the chatbot to address these kind of questions. Ideally, you make it transactional. So make sure that the whole journey can be done in the chatbot and monitor it more. And also these journeys can really be candidates for proactive use cases. So for example, that pop-up that comes up that the chatbot says, "Oh, I see you're looking at renewing your mortgage." You can do it in 3 simple steps in the chatbot. So. And then if you can't handle these very well, always make sure that you have a really good handover here to a live agent. So for example, here, offering detailed support, the banking chatbot says, "How can I help you?" And the customer says, "My credit card was stolen. I need to block it as soon as possible." So here's a high value journey for both. Why? For the customer, because they're worried that somebody's going to be spending money with their credit card, running up costs, charges, everything. And for the bank, it's really annoying because they have coverage, they have insurance coverage for stolen credit cards and all the malfeasance that goes on, but they can also incur costs and it takes a lot of effort. So as soon as that credit card is blocked, everyone's good, right? So the chatbot says, "I'm sorry to hear that. Let's get it blocked in 5 simple steps." And then it goes through a transactional journey to block the credit card. If you can't do that, it's no good just saying, "Okay, here's on the website, here you can read how to do it through our IVR," or whatever. No, get them over to a handover and get it blocked. So high value to both is like the prime candidate to start with and to do as well as possible. If it's low value to both, yeah, you can see if there's a lot of queries coming in which are kind of low value to both, but keep your answers basic. So basic FAQs maybe, or cluster them into just generic groups of content and try to answer those, because you're never really going to get a lot of value out of that, and the customers aren't either. Let's see, a key insight, really, really important, and that's also something that is an insight that's grown over the years. Focus on creating less dialogues, but try to be more transactional. So rather than having 150 FAQs, have 20 transactional journeys that really help the customers. If you do have a lot of FAQs, see it as kind of content that's also in the chatbot rather than using it as a core component of your content. And it's also future forward, right? Because as we'll see later in the presentation, large language models will soon likely be able to handle all kinds of FAQs. So there we go. I said large language models, and up pop a mid-journey image with, okay, what about ChatGPT, right? Beginning of the year, to be honest, we saw a lot of our potential clients, they were like, "Yeah, just let's press the pause button for a second, because ChatGPT is going to solve everything," right? Well, it hasn't so far. And let's look at the difference between a traditional NLU model, which is what we usually build chatbots in. So you have a language model, fixed set of intents. So these are all the answers that are in there that we pre-written, and then, or these are the trained parts. So all the previous customer queries have gone in here. We've trained them to intents. And one of those intents, each of them goes to a certain answer. So if a customer asks a question, the language model tries to match it to something that's already in there and then gives the answer. So a large language model is a next token prediction transformer architecture. There are some variants on this as well. which is basically, if I'm being unkind, a really fancy autocomplete. This means that large language models are amazing in generating information from the data set trained on. They're good at summarizing, translating. They seem to understand prompts better than NLUs. And they can generate training data for NLUs, and they can generate sample dialogues. And, even using a RAG solution, which I'll come to, you can create FAQ bots based on your own data. And that's all great, right? But the problem is that they are also limited by what they're trained on. They need to be really well prompted to create good output. And one of the major issues that we're still facing in the business sphere is hallucinations. So when I was introducing myself, you saw what Google Bard said about me. A lot of it was right. A lot of it was wrong. There was no way, if I would give you that you could distinguish what was right and what was wrong unless you really went and researched that, right? And it's also really, I know a lot of parties are working on it, but it's difficult to conduct successful transactional journeys using a large language model. It's not impossible, but it's much more difficult than using a traditional NLU chatbot with API integrations. And be careful. A lot of stuff you put into OpenAI, a lot of data you enter, prompts you enter, becomes material that they can train next generations of chatbots on. We've seen Samsung employees put in data. A lot of the banks here in the Netherlands have prohibited their employees from using these tools to summarize, for example, bank materials and things, because nobody's really sure where all the data is going at the moment. Okay, so can they solve it all? Tricky. Your key journeys need really high recognition rate, and our AI trainers have done some number crunching on this. If you have a really good working NLU model, you can get correct identifications of specific intent, so specific answers, from 60 to 80% based on incoming questions. If you look at LLMs, if you test them along similar lines, they only get 30 to 60%. They will generate an answer, but they'll really often kind of just miss the mark, right? The top dialogues, the ones that you will really rely on to deliver value, need the best conversation design. And actual conversation design is not something that LLMs are good in. They are often very verbose. They're often list really long lists of stuff. Here, my colleague Willem has asked for low intensity sports in around Shanghai for 4 adults. And you can see it just goes on and on. There's a list that goes on to 12 things. So it's not really effective at really addressing a customer's specific needs, right? Even though the illusion is created that it's like giving a really complete answer, it's not really answering the question. Another one, let's see, this is a mock-up where a customer asks about their bank balance, and an LLM is being used by the banks, and it just analyzes what is usually a bank balance. And it says most people, on average, it averages out to 0. So it says to this customer, you have €0 in your account. And then the customer says, wait, where did all my money go? So you can't just rely on it to give general answers to specific requests, right? Maybe this example is a bit over the top, but so what we're seeing in the market now is the development of hybrid solutions, where the two solutions live together in a single chatbot. So an NLU driven part of the chatbot, and then added onto it is what we call a RAG solution. So it's a guided, fenced in version of a large language model. That means that your top dialogues, which you design, which you put in the NLU model, get the best design. You can add transactional dialogues that you design fully and create, so that it takes step by step, takes a customer through what they need. And then, everything else, basically FAQs and everything else, you can train on your own materials, and it'll give relatively accurate answers. So, the RAG solution, retrieval augmented generation, that's considered one of the most promising solutions. You can even, have it through prompt engineering. You can have it speak in the same tone of voice that your chatbot persona would usually in your NLU. You can tweak that until you get that right. And we're working with some clients on developing these, and it's a really interesting field, but it's still very much like in development, right? So it's interesting, but it's remains to be seen whether it'll deliver business value very quickly. The two halves are basically, so all the transactional journeys will be in your NLU model. Your must be 100% correct journeys. So everything that the legal department says you can't, give information about this without it being signed off on the actual content. And your onboarding, so how do you start your handovers and your offloadings at the end of the conversation. And then the RAG solution could power things like FAQs, anything else. And also, what it's pretty good at, if you have a large catalog of products, for example, you can train them on that and then have customers ask questions about specific products. Let's see. How am I doing for time? Pretty good. So let's give you some key takeaways into the direct future. So once again, when and how should we use chatbots? Practically all customer type journeys can be automated eventually. What we are already seeing as confidence with users, because people are becoming more and more used to dealing with chatbots and conversational agents, is that the sales and commercial activities are also increasing. So whereas previously chatbots were mainly used as a kind of customer service tool, but not really for sales, we're seeing now that as they become more advanced and companies are more experienced in using them, also commercial activity is increasing with chatbots and IVRs, for example. Chat support with live agent will become more and more of an exception. So that more and more it will be the bespoke situations that you'll actually talk to a human being. More seamless integration between channels. So, a lot of chatbots now, they live on the website, but not yet in the same corporate app, or only on certain pages of the website, and not also through WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger and stuff like that. And we're seeing more and more that all those integrations where the chatbot lives is becoming more, all over those different surfaces. So be where your customer is, basically. Now, as for a copywriter, this next one breaks my heart, but natural language generation. So the generative AI will probably eventually replace people like me designing answers and writing them, and integrations. So we're going to be seeing more and more transactional journeys in chatbots. That's just the way it's going. And according to my colleague Jurgen, more real world robots that you can interact with. I'm not sure about this one, remains to be seen. Whenever I encounter robots that are around now, for example, in a restaurant and stuff, it's like hasn't convinced me that we will actually be seeing more physical robots, but that's his prediction. Whatever else changes, great conversation design is vital no matter what. So even if the copy that's in created or designed journeys becomes generated, we will still have to design how the customer journeys actually work. So we will still have to think about what goes first, what goes second, what goes third. Good AI training optimization will always be necessary. So there will always be someone tweaking the machine. We've all read the stories about how OpenAI employed thousands of contractors to kind of fine-tune the model. Fine-tuning the model will always be necessary. AI assistants, there's never been a chatbot that was finished, right? And as I said, a reliable strategy, business case was always vital to manage that conversational AI project. You never just start, right? And that's the final point. Never lose sight of what you're trying to achieve. Right? Why did you start building this thing, right? So insights for you to take home. The business case, really important, to get value from a project. It's no good just throwing money and time and effort at it and hoping that at the end something comes out. Choosing the correct scope, using business scoping is really mission critical. Always remember that there's just really one reason why your chatbot exists, and that's to meet the needs of your customers. Embrace how they speak. You cannot teach them to speak in your language. They will speak in their own language, referring to your products and services. We've seen that time and time and time again. And focus on high quality interactions rather than having a lot of interactions, a lot of quantitative interactions. So rather have 20 really useful things in your chatbot than 200 FAQs, right? Finally, large language models, RAG solution, generative AI, they can already probably help your chatbot be better, but it's not the magic, the silver bullet yet, right? You can use them for all kinds of stuff, and it's awesome, and they're awesome tools, but they're not suitable yet in their raw form to just throw all your data in there and let them talk to your customers and solve your customer support issues, for example. And I love this little image. This is from Bing Image Creator, powered by DALL-E. And the prompt was create a vector style image of a smiling robot counting cash money. So, you know, there we go. Okay, that was my talk. I was asked to do 30 minutes. So this was 30 minutes. And I was just want to plug this. You know, there's a great, if you have a chatbot in your business or your faculty or whatever it may be, make sure to hit up Ben Taylor for our free expert review, and make sure you join the community and enjoy the free classes and the content that we will be giving. Let's see. Yeah, I have a question or two. This is me with a beard, and then I have, yeah, from the University of Utah. I'm going to address that one first. Yeah, how students can pursue internships or job experience using chatbots and AI tools. It's always great. So students, one thing I remember from being a student is that I had time, which is something that now with kids and a job I don't have very much of. So if you can, you know, like form a group and create a chatbot or something. Like ChatGPT offers courses now that you can build free tools. You know, just be aware that the tools basically belong to them once you built them, I think. But build something that you can demo, right? And then yeah, we're always, you know, often at the lookout for folks. We have a CDR Services has a we're in Austin, Texas as well. So, you know, maybe we will be doing internships soon. And I think CDI has a job board, right? But I remember like 3 or 4 years ago, if you looked at LinkedIn and you searched for jobs like with the description of conversation designer or AI trainer, you found nothing because it didn't mean anything yet. And now you can find a lot of opportunities there. Okay, so let's just look at the questions we received. Do you think small businesses can benefit from using chatbots, or is the investment too big to make it worth it? Would there be a specific implementation you could recommend for small businesses to use? So, awesome question. This is all about scope. So if we were creating a business case here and it's a small business, then immediately I would look at, okay, where's the benefit? So let's say you are a barbershop and you can't pick up the phone all the time because you're actually cutting hair, right? We worked with a company called Good Call. I'm not plugging them specifically, but what they did was they have a really narrow scope telephone IVR application that basically does nothing else than just answer the phone, take your details. If you want to book a slot right away in the calendar, you can book a slot in the calendar, and then it wraps up and says that you'll be either receiving an email or being called back or something to confirm, right? So if you're a small business, zoom in on where you can get the biggest value. So zoom in on where you're actually expending too many costs or losing business opportunities or something like that, and then create a narrow scope chatbot so that, you know, once you build it, it'll be easy to maintain. It won't cost you hours and hours of work to like, you know, analyze it all the time and stuff like that. Just use it as, for example, a really smart answer phone or a calendar tool or something like that. So just have one application. And whenever people have other questions for your small business, just, you know, either put it on your website or just accept the fact that you won't be able to answer every single question. So narrow scope and a good scoping is really, really recommended for small businesses. And it can be very worthwhile. Just don't go down the 100 FAQs route, because, you know, it won't be worth it basically for a small business. Second question, is it good to implement a chatbot with very limited scope? Kind of ties into the first one. Yes, it's very good to implement a chatbot with very limited scope. I've always found that one of the trickiest things to address also with customers that when we are called in, with clients when we're called in that already have an operation, it's like really interesting to talk with them how they arrived at the scope that they have and what it's giving them. And oftentimes you find that for example, content is simply created because they see that people are asking these questions. And obviously that's a good place to start, but you always want to make a conscious decision. Okay, we see that some customers are asking this. Is it worth our effort and time to add content for this? Or are we okay with not answering certain questions and focusing on the stuff that really delivers volume and value? So always focus on where you can get the most value, and limited scope is better than just having a really broad scope. Yeah, so I got a Russian question. Google translated it for me. Tell us in more detail the correct connection of the chatbot to the site. I'm not sure about this. What I recommend, if you have a chatbot, even if it's relatively narrow scope, let it live on your chatbot on all pages, so that people don't have to look for it, which I've always found a bit strange. We saw that a lot with some of our clients, that they put it, for example, in a widget on the contact page. You have to find it somewhere. Just be, and call it a chatbot. You don't have to do the whole I'm a virtual agent thing. It's a chatbot, right? It's there for a purpose. If you have a good one, people will use it. If it's not good, people will hate it. I mean, that's how simple it is. But there's no sense in, being really coy about it and saying, oh yeah, we're going to have a chatbot, we're going to do all this effort and time, and then we're going to hide it somewhere on the website. So just put it out there. And what I always think is really good, if the chatbot, for example, if you're offering links and you click a link in the chatbot, that the chatbot hangs around for when the next page is presented, so that if that prompts another question, the chatbot is still there. And then finally, someone said, I love CDI, which we love you too. Thank you. Let's see. In the RAG testing, have we found the LLM that produced the best responses? That's a really good question. Actually, my colleague Jurgen and Willem and Gutje are the three people who are doing all the RAG work now, because I'm working for clients who more old school applications at the moment. I think OpenAI is clearly currently the market leader. They have a really good offering, and there's another company which I've totally forgotten the name of. Sorry about that. Which had a really impressive demo for an insurance company in the States, and I can't remember the name of. But it was a good RAG implementation, because it didn't have any or very many hallucinations. We actually on the CDI services website, we have a little chatbot called C, and we, all the way back in October of last year, we were experimenting with large language models with C, and that chatbot was making up the craziest stuff, so we never implemented that. Would have been fun, but let's see. What do you think are the best applications of both chatbots and voice bots, and are they let's see, are they different? I work in site loss in voice bots. Yeah, voice, it's really interesting. Before I cleaned up this presentation, I had a slide in there that voice is just really difficult to do well. It's not impossible, but there's a reason that Google deprecated a lot of the voice applications they were promoting heavily, to transfer more to voice and kind of visual representation. The thinking was you could do your groceries through your Google Home, but then if you were actually connected with the supermarket voice app and you were trying to order a specific kind of fusilli pasta, it got really complicated very quickly. So voice is challenging. It's much more challenging than a chatbot with a visual interface, but it can be done. And once again, it's like I'm banging the drum all the time, but a lot of it is about scope as well. So whenever we have clients who say, okay, we have this chatbot and now we want to transfer it to our IVR. So it just has to be a one-on-one transfer to our a telephonic solution, we always, with them, we take a few key journeys and we investigate, like, how would these work if you just hear a voice? Famously, for example, a Belgian telco had this journey which was really high traffic. It's like, how do I restart my Wi-Fi router? And basically what I did in a workshop, I just read out the chatbot journey and asked them to be the customer and interact with it. And it turned out that this company has 3 different types of Wi-Fi routers. And the way the chatbot deals with that is it shows the customer pictures and asks them, which router do you have? Now, you can imagine how that went, using voice. So once again, it's about scope, and it's about realizing that it's basically about being really honest about how much more difficult voice is, especially in transactional journeys. So especially the sending of information, describing things is more difficult. And also the understanding of information that the customer is telling you can be more difficult as well. For example, if you live in England, the way that addresses work is way more complicated than most countries. So I could live in Holy Road Cottage in Beaconsfield, and in England, that address is perfectly fine. If I put that on an envelope and add a stamp, it will arrive. But for a voice bot to understand what I actually mean when I give that address, it can be really tricky very quickly. So, but it can be done. But just realize voice is more difficult than chatbot. Yeah, I'm not sure about whether it was Writesonic or Botsonic, so I won't comment on any brand names here right now. So maybe revisit that at some later date. So, any more questions? I've been talking a lot. I'm like the broken chatbot that just keeps talking. Any more questions, comments, disagreements? Let's see. Yes. Drew has a question about dialect. Yeah, we do have. So dialects are more difficult, more challenging in voice. And it's also really, really heavily dependent on which language you're talking about. So in my own country, in the Netherlands, we have a few very strong dialects, but as soon as people start typing, they revert to, generally spoken Dutch. So that it's never really that much of an issue. In voice, however, it's like, even when they do try to speak, the general Dutch, their inflection or the way they pronounce words is just really difficult. So yeah, dialect is one of the things that can really throw a spanner in the works, and it's really something that I know that Amazon and Google have struggled with the Alexa units and the home units, is that dialect can weirdly throw things off kilter, right? So I know that, for example, in the Netherlands, we have Frisian, which is seen by some as a dialect of Dutch, but it's actually a separate language. And Google has a language translation module for that, so they deal with that a bit better. But then there's Twents, which is in the east of the Netherlands, and it's I forget what that language variant is officially called, but it's seen as a dialect. But it's also, when it's strong, it's almost like a separate language in itself, because it's more akin to German sometimes than Dutch. So it can really throw off your voice project. So that's difficult. You can sometimes, if a large group of your user base is like speaking in a specific dialect, you can use some entities to improve the training of your model. So include dialect words in entities to improve the performance of your NLU. So yeah, that may help a bit. Let's see. In our practice, have you come across a fully conversational website or experience? Wow. Favorite commercial implementations of chatbots? Ooh, that's a really difficult one. Yeah, one I really like, it's a bit of a boring choice, but NatWest Bank, we've worked with, they have their chatbot Cora. I like Vodafone's Toby. And a fully conversational website or experience. Yeah, I should do more. I should look into that a bit more. There's some educational tools which are really cool. The Willem of Orange one that we did here in the Netherlands, it's like that was years ago, and it's still going, and it's still used, and it's still working, even though it's really narrow scope because it's Willem talking about himself. But those can be very fun. What I think is a shame is that the kind of choose your own adventure type things for voice, like Alexa and Home, I don't think they really ever really took off. I had high hopes for that because I thought that'd be really funny, but let's see. Yeah, now I mentioned NatWest Bank with their chatbot Cora, and the School TV, School TV with Willem van Oranje, Willem of Orange. So yeah, interesting stuff. Okay. Yeah, it's always difficult for me to talk about really good chatbots because we have, to be honest, ridiculously high standards, and even if we work on them, even if we work on them, we're never fully satisfied because it's always like when I was a copywriter full time, it's always when I would see my stuff back later, I was like, that could have been better. So we're always critical. That's why I always say chatbots are never done. Yeah, the choose your own adventure books, they were awesome. And I know that a lot of people implemented those. You can get them on Google Home and Alexa, and they're quite fun. So with sound effects and things like that, it's good fun. Okay. Any more questions? Otherwise, I'll give you a few moments back. Remember, if you are in any way have a corporate or other chatbot, you can get a free small expert review through CDI. Just hit up Ben for that. And yeah, it'd be great to talk further. Join the community. And let's see whether we can rid the world of crappy chatbots one chatbot at a time. Okay. I think that was it. Everyone have a great day. Have a great evening. And be safe wherever you are. And spread the love. Bye, everyone.